You open the Psalms expecting triumph. You expect crowns, processions, answered prayers, and songs rising after victory. But again and again you enter a different place. You find caves instead of palaces, night watches instead of celebrations, tears instead of certainty. A voice cries from the wilderness, from exile, from betrayal, from sickness, from the edge of despair. And you begin to see that many of these sacred songs were not born after deliverance. They were born inside the ache. You stand where David stood when the throne was still far away and danger was near. You hide among rocks. You listen for footsteps in the dark. You feel what it is to be chosen by God and still hunted by men. At first, it looks like a fugitive writing poetry in the wilderness. But beneath it is fear, loneliness, and the terrible silence between promise and fulfillment. You hear the psalm ask why God seems far off. You hear the soul thirst for the living God while enemies mock and memory hurts. This is not just a story about ancient suffering. It is a story about what happens when faith is forced to speak without comfort. The prayer becomes raw because the heart has nowhere else to go. The words do not rise from control. They rise from need. You realize that the Psalms were not given only for the strong hour. They were given for the collapsing hour. They were shaped in the place where your strength fails, where your explanations thin out, where your hands are empty and your future is hidden. What sounds like lament is not the absence of faith. It is faith refusing to become silent. So many psalms come from people who feel abandoned because abandonment is where the soul stops performing. In that stripped place, prayer loses its polish. It becomes hunger. It becomes breath. It becomes the cry of someone who can no longer pretend to be victorious. And this changes the psalm from a religious poem into a meeting place between weakness and God. You feel the strange holiness of that. God did not preserve only songs of conquest. He preserved songs of confusion, delay, shame, and grief. He made room in Scripture for trembling voices. He allowed the sacred page to hold the sound of a person who still speaks to heaven while feeling left alone on earth. That means your darkest prayer is not disqualified. It may be nearer to the Psalms than your composed words ever were. When you pray these lines, the wilderness is no longer only David's wilderness. The exiled is no longer only Israel's exile. The pit, the night, the waiting, the unanswered cry begin to look like the hidden landscapes of your own soul. The psalm stops being a record of someone else's pain. It becomes language for your own silence before God. And then the deeper truth appears. These songs were born in abandonment because that is where dependence is purified. When every outer sign of victory disappears, you learn whether you still turn toward God in the dark. The psalm is not just about suffering. It is about the soul reaching for refuge when refuge cannot yet be seen. So you do not stand in the psalms as a spectator. You stand there as one of the voices. You bring your fear, your delay, your grief, your long night of not understanding. And you realize that what looked like a collection of ancient songs was actually a map of the soul before God, teaching you that even the cry of abandonment can become holy prayer.